There is a pattern that has destroyed every dominant civilization in human history. It's not invasion, not rebellion, not even war. It's something far more predictable, far more consistent, and far more destructive. A pattern that begins quietly, unfolds slowly, and ends with a collapse so total that future generations don't believe it could have been prevented. Rome followed the pattern, Spain followed the pattern, Britain followed the pattern, and today, right now, the United States is walking the exact same path, step by step, warning sign by warning sign. History isn't repeating itself. It's replaying, almost line for line. Every empire believes it's different. Rome believed it, Spain believed it, Britain believed it, and America believes it now. But the numbers don't lie. The spending doesn't lie, the debt doesn't lie, the currency doesn't lie. Empires don't fall because someone else defeated them, they fall because they defeat themselves. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Let's start with Rome, the empire that ruled the known world for nearly 500 years. Its armies were unstoppable, its engineering unmatched, its influence global. But behind the legions, behind the marble buildings and the golden eagles, the rot had already begun. Rome's downfall didn't start with barbarian invasions, it started with money. The denarius, the backbone of the Roman economy, was once nearly pure silver. Trustworthy, stable, universally accepted. But empires are expensive. Soldiers need to be paid, roads need to be built, provinces need to be managed. And Rome didn't have enough revenue to maintain its ambitions. So the emperors did what collapsing powers always do. They debased the currency. Nero reduced the silver content. Then Caracalla, then Gallienus. Over 2 centuries, the denarius went from 100% silver to barely 5%. By the end, it was nothing but worthless metal with a thin silver coating. But the coins still had the emperor's face. They still had the same name. The government insisted nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Prices exploded, soldiers demanded payment in gold, trade collapsed. Farmers refused to accept the currency. The economy seized, and when the money died, Rome died. Not because it lacked power, but because it destroyed the foundation of its power, its currency. 12 centuries later, Spain would repeat the pattern almost perfectly. The richest empire on earth, overflowing with silver from the New World. More wealth than any nation in history. Enough treasure to dominate continents. Enough to fund armies, fleets, and palaces. But there's a paradox in economics. More money doesn't make you richer if everyone suddenly has more money. When Spain flooded Europe with silver, prices soared. Inflation raged. The wealth Spain thought it had was an illusion. And while Spain spent its silver on wars and luxuries, other nations spent their time building industry, innovation, and production. Spain went bankrupt repeatedly. 1,557, 1,560, 1,575, 1,596. 4 defaults in 1 century, each one destroying trust, each one driving lenders away, each one forcing Spain to debase its own currency to survive just a little longer. By the 1600s, the empire was a shell of itself. By the 1700s, Britain had taken Spain's place as the world's greatest power. The empire stretched across continents. Its navy ruled the oceans. Its financial system was the most advanced on the planet. London became the center of global trade, global banking, global influence. But the same forces that destroyed Rome, the same forces that destroyed Spain, began tightening around Britain too. Slow at first, almost invisible, but deadly. Britain's rise came from industry, innovation, and production. But its decline came from debt, endless debt, wars with France. Wars in the colonies, wars to protect trade routes, wars to maintain the empire. Each victory made Britain stronger, globally, but weaker financially. Its national debt exploded from £16 million in 1697 to £850 million by 1815, a 53-fold increase. And like Rome and Spain, Britain assumed that because it was powerful, because it was respected, because its currency was trusted, it could borrow forever. But history doesn't work like that. Even the strongest empire hits a point where maintaining dominance becomes more expensive than the benefits it brings, where military costs rise faster than economic growth, where debt grows faster than revenue, where the empire becomes addicted to borrowing just to sustain the illusion of stability. Britain began selling off assets, raising taxes, cutting domestic investment, and worst of all, printing money. The pound weakened, inflation rose, investors lost confidence, and gradually, quietly, the empire that had ruled the world entered a long decline. By the end of World War II, Britain was bankrupt, entirely dependent on American loans just to function. The empire wasn't defeated by another nation. It collapsed under the weight of its debt. The pattern had repeated itself again. And now, today, the United States stands in the exact same place Rome once stood. The same place Spain once stood, the same place Britain stood a century ago. The world's dominant power, the world's reserve currency, the world's largest military, the world's most influential economy. And yet, beneath that surface, the same cracks are spreading. America's debt has exploded past $34 trillion more than any empire in history at any point in history. Annual deficits are now so large that the government must borrow trillions just to stay afloat, not to expand, not to build, not to conquer, just to survive. America spends more on interest payments than it does on national defense, more on interest than education, transportation, or veterans. Rome paid its legions with debased coins. Spain paid its armies with borrowed silver. Britain paid for its empire with printed pounds. And America? America pays for everything with debt. But debt isn't the only warning sign. Empires don't collapse because of a single problem. They collapse because many problems converge at the same time. Internal division, economic stagnation, overexpansion, loss of trust, political paralysis, declining productivity, a currency losing its dominance. Every empire that died experienced the same sequence, and the United States is now checking every box. Every collapse begins not with chaos, but with confidence. Confidence in the currency, confidence in the economy, confidence in the government, confidence in the future. Rome lost confidence when the denarius became worthless. Spain lost confidence after its repeated defaults. Britain lost confidence when the pound was forced off gold. And America is losing confidence now. Not all at once, slowly, in stages. First internationally, then domestically, and finally, internally. Foreign nations have already begun reducing their dependence on the U.S. dollar. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily. China and Russia move away from dollar trade. The BRICS nations propose alternatives. Central banks buy gold at record levels. These are the same signs that appeared before Britain lost reserve currency status, before Spain lost European dominance, before Rome lost the trust of its provinces. The world always senses when an empire begins to wobble, but the deeper danger is internal, the same internal decay that hollowed out every major civilization before its fall. Rome was divided between rich and poor. Spain was fractured by class and regional tensions. Britain faced internal political fragmentation. And the United States, today, is experiencing cultural, economic, and political division at a scale unseen in generations. A population that no longer trusts its institutions, a government that no longer trusts itself, and a financial system held together by debt, printing, and hope. History shows a consistent pattern. When people inside an empire lose faith in their own system, collapse accelerates. Citizens begin withdrawing savings. Investors demand higher interest rates. Governments print more money to cover the gaps. Inflation rises, productivity drops, innovation slows, and resentment grows. Not because people want collapse, but because collapse becomes the natural result of pressures building for decades. Look at the timeline. Rome's decline took 200 years. Spain's took 150. Britain's took about 100. Each collapse happened faster than the one before it, because the world became more interconnected, more globalized, more dependent on financial systems that moved too quickly to control. And America? America is declining at record speed faster than any empire before it, because its entire economy is built on systems that react instantly. Stock markets, global capital flows, digital banking, automated trading, and mass communication. A rumor can collapse a bank in hours. A bond sell-off can raise borrowing costs in minutes. A geopolitical shift can move trillions overnight. The danger today is not slow decay, it's sudden tipping points. And every major empire in history reached a point where small disruptions triggered massive consequences. Rome had the crisis of the 3rd century. Spain had repeated banking failures. Britain had the sterling crisis. These weren't the causes of collapse, they were the accelerators, the final straws. So where is America now? Somewhere between the warning stage and the acceleration stage. Debt is skyrocketing. Growth is slowing. Inflation remains persistent. Political division is deepening. Geopolitical rivals are rising. And the dollar, America's greatest weapon, is facing challenges from all sides. These are not predictions. These are the observable, historical signs that every collapsing empire displayed. And yet, as always, the population believes the empire will last forever. Rome believed it, Spain believed it, Britain believed it, and Americans believe it now. But believing in permanence has never saved any empire from the mathematics of decline. The truth is uncomfortable, but it's simple. Every empire falls for the same reason, not because they are conquered, but because they become too expensive to maintain. They grow too large, too complex, too divided, too confident, too indebted. They begin spending more than they produce. They rely on borrowing instead of building. They depend on their reputation instead of their strength. They believe the world needs them more than they need the world. And when the bill finally comes due, They can't pay it. Rome thought its armies guaranteed stability. Spain thought its silver guaranteed wealth. Britain thought its empire guaranteed dominance. And America thinks its dollar guarantees supremacy. But history is merciless to civilizations that mistake power for immortality. The warning signs America faces today are not subtle. A shrinking middle class, record inequality, political polarization, institutional distrust, currency debasement, massive deficits, a military stretched thin, a financial system built on leverage and speculation. These are the exact conditions that preceded every major imperial decline in history. Not similar, not comparable, identical. But collapse doesn't happen in a straight line. It happens in stages. First slow, then sudden. First denial, then panic. First warnings, then consequences. Rome dismissed its critics as alarmists. Spain mocked warnings about insolvency. Britain ignored economists who predicted dollar dominance would replace the pound. And today, the United States treats anyone who points to the patterns as exaggerated, dramatic, or misinformed. But the patterns aren't opinions. They're history. Look closely, and you can see the shift. Countries diversifying away from the dollar. Investors demanding higher interest to buy U.S. debt. Geopolitical rivals pushing for new trade routes, new payment systems, new alliances. Domestic industries deteriorating as manufacturing moves overseas. A political system unable to address long-term problems. A population distracted by internal conflict while global influence quietly erodes. This is exactly what decline looks like. Not a dramatic collapse, not a sudden disaster, but a slow realization that the foundations are no longer stable. And then, one day, a trigger appears. A financial shock. A geopolitical crisis, a debt spiral, a currency event, something small that sets off something big. And the empire that looked unshakable suddenly isn't. So is America next? The answer isn't emotional, it isn't ideological, it isn't political, it's mathematical. Every empire that reached America's current financial trajectory, every one without exception, collapsed into a smaller, weaker version of itself. Not because collapse was inevitable, but because denial was. Because the warning signs were ignored until they could no longer be managed. But here's the truth history also reveals. Decline is not the same as destruction. Empires don't vanish, they transform. They contract. They reset. They shift from global dominance to regional influence. They lose control, but not existence. Rome lived on for centuries after its fall. Britain still exists. Spain still exists. What changed was their place in the world. The real question America faces isn't whether it will collapse. It's what form that collapse will take. Slow decline, sudden reset, or a complete transformation of its economy and global role. Because the blueprint is already written, the pattern is already in motion, and history has already shown us exactly how this story ends. And the only question left now is how close America is to the final chapter.